It's my pleasure tonight. We have Peter M. from Boca Raton, Florida. And my boss always said something about what Boca Raton means. I can't remember. Something about a rat or something. I don't know. Anyway. But anyway, Peter's coming to us from Florida, and I'm so excited to hear his story. I just learned that he's going to be speaking at our state convention this year in Columbus, Mississippi. So I'm probably going to hear him twice this year. And he's got a couple of other speaking engagements too. But anyway, I'm very glad to introduce Peter from Boca. Please bring it, sir. Thank you for showing up.
Recording in progress.
Okay, well, thank you so much. My name is Peter, recovered alcoholic, and thank you for the invitation to be out here. I got to tell you, I haven't been on Zoom, and it's been a while. It's almost like the first time I was on. It's a little intimidating with all these folks. I've always said Zoom reminds me of dropping acid and watching the Brady Bunch. It's interesting format, but it's kind of neat to be out here. I haven't been out here in quite a while. So thank you. June 23rd, 1988 is when God separated me from alcohol. And I'm very grateful for this gift, very grateful to be a member of Good Standing in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sponsor. His name is Bob Azans from St. Paul, Minnesota. And I have a home group down here in Fort Lauderdale called Alcoholics in God. And I really love being there on Thursday nights. It's one of my favorite places to be in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a really cool group. So if you're ever down here, come on over. We have a meeting there on Monday night and Thursday nights, and Thursday's a rotating 12-step series. It's just a cool place to be. I am really grateful for so many things, like many of us, I'm sure, here tonight, for what God and Alcoholics Anonymous has brought to me. The longer I'm sober, I'm especially grateful for the things that God has removed and continues to remove. And looking back on my life, because we kind of live it forward and understand it backwards, many of the things I thought I really needed, things I really wanted, I never got. I'm so grateful I never did. At the time, they seemed to be paramount, and I thought I needed those things to be okay, to be a better man, to be a better AA member, and they just never came down the hill for me. And where I am currently, I am kind of grateful for that. It has kind of fine-tuned the instrument. When I don't get everything I want, my dependence upon God seems to be greater. And God has a wonderful way of intervening. So my faith doesn't come from the wisdom of Joe on the corner or the old-timer AA meeting, but my strength is drawn from this power called God. And the longer I'm sober, the more I need to lean in all the way to God. I've shared this from so many of these podiums that I'm probably getting older and hopefully a little bit wiser as I kind of move on in this journey of sobriety, how this whole thing for me is about getting soul food. This whole thing for me is about personal relationships with others. We look at our bedevilments on page 52, and they really take a look at where I am currently with unmanageability. But I have to always take a look at where I am with relationships, how important they are, how I can get some space between me and perhaps people who are really not good for me to be around, lovingly detach. But with the folks that I have tension with, the folks that perhaps I have this real justified resentment with, these folks that I feel tension with when I see them walk in a meeting, what am I going to do about that stuff? Because if I don't, what I start to accumulate is plaque on my soul, and little by slowly, I kind of get this little wedge between God and me. Now, we can never literally be separated from that power which we're connected to, but the sense of separation is there because I'm focusing on this person and what they're not doing for me. And I just can't afford that. I can't afford to be walking around with anger and worse than that towards other people. I disagree with many. I would do it another way, but I still need to pray for forgiveness. And it's, I think, the way God would want me to live. I can't afford that kind of stuff. It's important for me to let people who are close to me know they're appreciated by me. People close to me, let them know how I feel about them, that I love them, without expecting them to ever to reciprocate. That's a payoff, and I don't have a right to do that. I have a right to seek comfort from someone else. Sobriety, my relationship with God, my relationship with you and Alcoholics Anonymous, and my sobriety. I have found, sobriety is really fragile, just like life. There's no guarantee I or any of us in this meeting tonight are going to be here tomorrow, but my mind wants me to believe that I'm going to be around forever, and I take things for granted. Same thing with sobriety. You get sober a little while, you say, well, I kind of know the routine, I know where the meetings are, and I'm very busy, and life starts to take over, and I forget about my sobriety. I forget I'm alcoholic, and what mine wants to do is just push the envelope a little bit. I can skip prayer, I can skip a sponsor, I don't really need a sponsor, I don't have to take that phone call, and little by slowly, I start to step away from you. And when I start to step away from you, I start to step away from God, and vice versa. And what that brings to me is a sense of isolation, believe it or not. And in a place of isolation, I'm consumed with me, and I start to suffer. And I start to forfeit all the invitations that God is sending to me because I'm consumed with me again. So I am running around in AA sober, but I'm completely untreated. I'm acting like a drunk without ever putting a drink in me. And what I learned a long time ago by watching many people and getting great lessons, we were talking about a gentleman, Don P., earlier, is that I can die from alcoholism without ever putting a drink in me. My alcoholism does not come in a bottle of whiskey. And when I was new and going through 7 treatment centers before I got to AA in 1988, my belief system, this mind, thought if I can just stay away from the drink, I would be wonderful, life would be great. And you know what? I got separated in 1988 and I run into me, and it wasn't great. In fact, I seemed to be more miserable and worse off without a drink and me sober and dry as tumbleweed than when I was drinking. And it was a rude wake-up call, a huge awakening that more needed to be done. My first 6 months in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was not the poster child for recovery. I was going to meetings. I was trying to learn and listen. I was desperate to get anything to get me well, but I didn't have steps in my life. I was talking to certain men, in AA for guidance, but I wasn't held accountable. And almost 6 months to the day in Alcoholics Anonymous, only by God's grace, I didn't get loaded because I just was seeking relief again. And I can do that while I'm sober. I'm seeking comfort rather than God. I'm looking to feel better rather than to get better. And I start to do things that I think are going to give me comfort, and they might, but they may be the very things that drive another wedge between me and God. So I guess the long and short of it, my job is to love others as God loves me, and my life is none of my business. And with 35 plus years sober, my mind wants to make my life and your life my business. And I start to collide with other people. And it looks like this. I go into a meeting and Joe is supposed to be speaking on the 3rd step and he isn't. And I start, character assassinating under my breath because he's not following the format. Or a youngins, is got 30 days and they're misbehaving and I want to ban them from AA. And all that kind of dialogue in the head. It's me playing God again, knowing what's best for everyone. I need to avoid that like the plague. And that doesn't mean I'm apathetic at all. I'm very involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when my opportunity is presented to me to speak at a group conscious meeting, I will, if it's necessary. So I've learned a lot, and hopefully it works for others in my attempt to be of service to many. But how did I get here, and what does this relationship God look like currently? You can tell by the way I speak, folks, I'm not from Mississippi. I'm I'm from New York. Lately, I feel like I have to apologize based on what's going on in New York when I tell people I'm originally from New York. But I currently live in Florida. I haven't been here since 2011, but born and raised in a place called Brooklyn, New York. I'm an old Brooklyn boy. And I couldn't be more grateful to be brought up in Brooklyn back in the day, because it was a wonderful place to grow up where I grew up. It was just a cool place to be. When I was growing up, I remember the 60s and early 70s, especially the late 60s. Now, there were a lot of bad things happening in this country, but where I grew up was almost like growing up in Mayberry. I mean, it was just like a small town feel to it. In this concrete jungle. I mean, you left your doors open and no one was walking in, and the neighbors would watch your house, and you could leave your bicycle in front of the house and be there when you got back later. For a while, it was like that, and I thought the whole world was like that until disco and MTV showed up and ruined everything, and the world seemed to change on the time. But for me, guys, growing up. It's funny when you're in bondage and torment, you don't realize how much of it you're in until you get out and taste a little bit of freedom. And I look back on growing up, and I thought, having an alcoholic mom who was committed to psych wards too many times and suicide attempts, and my dad in the life he was living, that this is growing up. And it wasn't until I got sober and got free, little by slowly of my past, I saw that although my family did the very best they could, what they had, my dad would do anything for his children. It was messy, and so I grew up in this family where mom was passed out often, or in a psych ward, and my dad was living his life, and often he'd leave on a Friday and come home Monday or Tuesday. Gambling and doing what he was doing. And I learned how to grow up quick. I had two younger brothers. And thank God for my grandparents who pretty much raised me and my brothers. I have bad things happen to me. And this is not why I'm alcoholic. And, it's not for pity. It's just my story. But there were things that happened to me that were quite unpleasant between ages 8 to 10 from some man who I always refer to as a distant relative, and he was doing things to me that he should be arrested for and put away for a long time. And I walked with a lot of secrets as a little guy. Walked with the secret of mom is in another psych ward, and I couldn't tell my friends, or mom was passed out again, and my dad was who he was, and this man was molesting me. So it's tough to show up in school when you got a lot of noise like that going on, feeling completely inferior and inadequate. And my venue out of that, my path out of that to get some relief was music. I was a gifted little musician growing up, and God gave me a wonderful gift of music, and it was my source of refuge, if you will. And I got lots of accolades for it. And I've shared this so many times. I was the little guy in the neighborhood who was going to make it out via music. I was good in sports, I was good in school, but music was a thing that I was going to get out, and everyone was banking on that, including myself. I mean, it's really interesting. I was like 7 or 8, 9 years old going to school, and I knew all the members of the Doors and the Rolling Stones and Cream and bands like that, and the Temptations and the Four Tops. Motown and rock was my thing, and my friends were playing with GI Joes. I could see the difference. My outlook on life was different back then. But at 14 years old, I picked up my first drink and picked up my first drunk as well. It was Colt 45 beer. And I desperately wanted to be like the guys on the corner. They were roughhousing and flirting with the girls, and listening to the music I just had mentioned. It was just a cool time. You had to kind of work your way up with these guys, and they were worldly men, mature men. They were like 17 years old, and I thought they had the secrets to the universe, and they hung out on street corners back. That's what we did in Brooklyn and in New York. You had a street corner or a schoolyard that you gave your allegiance to. So 14 years old, I grabbed a quart of beer. I had never been drunk before, albeit I tasted some of my grandfather's homemade wine. It's almost a rite of passage in an Italian-American family, you know. But I don't know what drinking's about. I don't even know drunk. And I did it that night. And I remember I started to drink the Colt 45 beer. I saw what those guys were like, and that was my goal, to get like them. They just seemed to be hip, cool, flirting, roughhousing. It was a cool place to be. And I remember I wanted to smoke a cigarette because it just looked so cool to drink and smoke a cigarette. I mean, that's where I want to be. And, you know, I think about it, even when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, that I was still looking. This mind had me programmed. And it can do this with double-digit long-term sobriety, that the mind still seeks outside of me to make me feel okay, to remedy this internal thing I got going on that's not okay. So I'll look for money, property, and prestige. I'll look for the bigger house, 2 cars, more money. Not that we need money to live and we need a roof over our head, but more of it, of external stuff to remedy what's going on in me. And it was like that as a kid. I was just completely blind to it. And I polished off a half a quart of Colt 45 beer, and I started to feel a lot different and a lot better about me, about life. And by the time I finished a quart of beer, I wasn't even thinking of this horrific pain I walked with of my mom, who committed suicide about 6 months before my first drunk, thereabouts. And I wasn't I wasn't thinking about my dad, who was just terribly afraid of back then. Everything was removed. I was very present to the moment, and I loved it. And I remember, being able to flirt with the girls on the corner. They must have thought I was a little knucklehead, but in my mind, I was Elvis Presley this night. And I loved it. I really enjoyed it. And I remember walking home back to my house, and I know I'm drunk. I can feel drunk. This is what they talk about. I was insulated. I was powerful. I'm in control, and the world is my oyster. I really dug it, and I had this fleeting thought that there is no way I'm going to school on Monday sober. I tasted drunk, and I want more. This has to last forever. And when I fast forward a little bit here, I've heard guys who are bar drinkers. I really wasn't a bar drinker. I've been in plenty, but I wasn't that guy. But I've heard them talk about not being able to get off the bar stool when they had an appointment to make, get home to dinner, get home to the kids, get to work, wherever they had to go. They were glued to the bar stool. And their life revolved around maybe a 2-block radius of the bar. I get that, because at the end, my life consisted of about a half a mile, and it was in the Lower East Side of Manhattan called Alphabet City. That was my universe, and I didn't venture too far out of there. Everything was there, and I couldn't get out. And there was so many times where I knew I should not pick up a drink. It's going to get bad, but I had to. And I knew I need to get home, and I can't. And I knew I need to get to work, and I can't, because King Alcohol had me, and I knew I was glued, and I can't get out. And at the end, I didn't even care. But it started with the first one, and I don't know, the road I'm paved on is right to hell. It's called alcoholism. That the booze was a symptom of a much greater problem. And I've learned that in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's all about my thinking, because that's where the problem centers. The part of me that continues to create problems in my life is not the part of me that I go to solve it. And it was this huge distance, if you will, between head and soul, and I never knew that existed. But I do know that once I pick up a drink, I got stuck in the craving or the more. I needed more, and I got stuck in more, and I couldn't get out. Regardless of how bad things were burning around me, I can't get out, and that mind drives me back to that, which is killing me, which really frightened me about alcoholism. My first year or so, I have this eating disorder that I'm not telling anyone about. I'm binging and purging, and I'm humiliated by it. And I had to get help. Someone had called my sponsor, and we went to outside help, and I went to another fellowship to kind of deal with that. But alcoholism will go underground and resurface in other areas. Even though I'm stone cold sober, I'm acting out. It'll go underground and show up in sex, food, gambling, you name it. I will get addicted to anything left untreated because I'm seeking relief, because I'm not okay with me where I am right now. So I need to reach out. And so my first drunk was pretty euphoric for me. It was wonderful. When I woke up the next morning, I remembered everything and I loved it. And I couldn't wait to capture that elusive feeling once more. I was really, I'm a cradle Catholic, and my mom, bless her heart, brought me to church and Mass. And as a Catholic, there's all these things you need to do. They're called communion and confirmation and all that. I did all of that. And I was always told by my mom that God loves you and he's forgiving and he's merciful. But I watched her get sick and after several attempts at suicide, finally do it. And there was it wasn't a conscious decision, but there was a decision, if you will, that I want no part of this God guy. I mean, what kind of God does this? What kind of God gives his son a gangster for a dad who have no relationship with? What kind of God gives a mom who's full-blown on narcotics, alcohol, and mental health issues and takes a... What kind of God is this? I want no part of it. And I was never an atheist. I knew God was out there, but he just wasn't so kind. And I kind of got cast into this sea of self-reliance, like a lot of us, and just trying to figure it out as you go, ad-libbing the whole way, and getting a lot of bad information from people I thought were giving me good information. And I'd say, by the line, the truth would always find me over and over and over again. My alcoholism gets a life by taking mine. That's what it does. It feeds off of me. And it'll pay any price tomorrow to seek comfort right now. And I literally mean tomorrow with 35 years sober. My mind, if I'm not careful, if I'm not working on the soul, my mind starts to take over and will figure out things I can do to seek some pleasure and pay the price. So I'll figure it out tomorrow. I'll worry about tomorrow. I'll get back in the saddle tomorrow. That's what it does. It has no use for me. Why we tell new people, bring the body and the mind will follow, it blows me away. It's the last thing we should be offering any newcomer. Think the drink through, play the tape to the end, keep it green, remember you come from. That's the part of me. The part of me that's doing this is going to say, you know what, a double vodka isn't too bad right now. The further away I get from my head, the better. That's where the main problem is. And so when in the third step it says we enjoy peace of mind, which kind of contradicts everything I just said, but how that happens is as the soul gets awakened via the 12 steps and prayer, meditation, and work with others, all the things I'm asked to do, what happens is the soul starts to speak, and it kind of, if you will, if you get the visual is the soul kind of working its way up to here, and we have a thought. It's a godly thought. It's a forgiving thought. It's a loving thought. It's a helpful thought. It's a service thought. It's stuff like that. But it's all from the soul. So I need to get soul food and Alcoholics Anonymous. I can pay so much attention to what people are thinking about, what I'm wearing, what's going on in the world. And I mean, a lot of us do that, but I can make that paramount rather than listening to God, rather than having a relationship with God. Because for me, Alcoholics Anonymous is about putting my hand in God's hand and nothing less than that great fact. And so I shouldn't be in a place to apologize for God or hide God in a closet. It just doesn't work that way for me. I've heard people tell me youngins aren't ready to hear about God. Really? Well, when are we going to tell them? When we do their memorial service, perhaps. So in music, there's something called a crescendo, where the music gets bigger and louder. And that's what my alcoholism was doing. And in a short time, a few years later, I'm around 18 or 19, and I get taken to my first treatment center because I'm drinking a lot and I can't get out. I got the craving going on, I got the obsession going on, and I'm spiritually bankrupt, and the world owns me. People own me. Your opinion of me owns me. It's slavery. And I got caught stealing from my dad. I was forging checks from his checkbook, and I got caught, and off I went to my first treatment center. I joke about this now. It wasn't such a joke back then, but I was about as sharp as a bowling ball. I thought when you cash a check at a bank or a merchant, wherever you went, that those checks, after the merchant cashed them, they kind of like disappeared into space somewhere. No one knew. There was no money trail. I knew nothing about checking statements back then. So when my dad got his checking statement and there were all these forged checks, he was not happy with me, to say the least, and he came looking for me. Now, this is not the type of guy you want looking for you. My dad didn't smile when he was happy back then. Um, some of you guys might remember that Goodfellas movie with Robert De Niro. My dad was Robert De Niro. This was not the guy you want annoyed with you on any day. And he was looking for me. Now, he wasn't going to hurt me. But in my mind, I was in trouble, a lot of trouble. And he found me sitting in a car with this young lady I had met the night before, and I was in love or stalking, same thing for an alcoholic. And my dad was irate. And when he caught me, I blamed the girl in the car, and I blamed the guys in the neighborhood, and I blamed mom's passing. It went something like, Mom committed suicide, Dad, I'm all confused. I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. And my dad says, well, I'm going to put you in a place that helps people like you. And they drove me off to this town called Amityville, Long Island, which was a private psych hospital where my mom had been 20 times. And inside they had a treatment center and a detox. And I felt like I was, driving into the insane asylum where my mom had just been, and this is what my life has come to, and I'm just a kid. I'm 18 or 19 years old. That scared me more than actually going into a treatment center. And it was around 28, 30 days later, they discharged me because that's what insurance companies said I was cured on, 28 or 30 days. And I had that young lady meet me at the door with a pint of whiskey. They mentioned something called AA, never heard it before, but I'm going to drink first. And I got drunk and never went to AA. I didn't even think I was alcoholic. Why do I need help? I'm not like these crazy people in treatment. And you know what? With 7 treatment centers, my first 6 treatment centers, I was not a guy who accumulated 6 months or 90 days or a year and got drunk. In fact, the most amount of sobriety I accumulated was 2 days over all those years. If I wasn't locked up or in treatment, I was drunk, high, or both, or in the pursuit of doing one or the other. I had no sober time other than treatment or getting locked up. In fact, in 2 treatment centers, I had drugs brought in. I mean, that's where I was at. I was hell-bent for disaster, and I welcomed the idea of dying at the end. And I made my 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th treatment center. And by the time, guys, I get into my 5th treatment center, I'm full-blown alcoholic, and I know it. I can't get away from alcohol. I can't get away from whiskey. If I'm up, I'm drinking. And if I don't drink, I start to get sick from it. And I got addicted to some non-conference approved dry goods along the way, some really heavy narcotics. And I had marks all over my body for living proof of that. So I got that, pills and narcotics, and I got the trifecta going on, and I can't get out. And I know I'm not getting out. I'd made futile attempts while I'm in treatment. I make sweet promises to the Lord, and then I hit the fresh air, and I think a drink would fix this. And I went into my 5th treatment center, and they didn't let me go after 30 days. But they had me in there for 9 consecutive weeks. And, You know you're not doing too well when your side of the door doesn't have a doorknob on it. That's not a good sign that life is just going wonderful. But after 9 weeks of being in this inpatient treatment center, the same one, my alma mater in Amityville, Long Island, was there 7 times. I'm bathing and I'm eating and I'm shaving and I'm showing up for group and a little fitness center they take me to. And, I got a little color back in my face. I'm finally able to hold some food down. And they discharged me on a Saturday morning after 9 weeks. And reality hit when I hit the fresh air. What do I do now? I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have a job and I don't have money. I don't know where to go. And all those voices that many of us walk around with were really loud. And one of them was you need a drink to figure this out, what I'm going to do with my life. And so I call home collect, and my dad picks up the phone, and I accepted the call, and I tell him my situation. He says, get in the cab and come home. I'll square it with the cab driver when you get here. It was a few-hour drive back to my dad's house. And I remember my two kid brothers, when I walked in the house, my two younger brothers were standing in the kitchen. Now, these two little guys were young men now. But when they were youngins, they idolized me for my music. And I was the older brother, and I looked out for them, and they looked up to me. They really did. And when I walked in the house this time, they were standing in the kitchen, and my middle brother yelled to my dad, what is he doing here? He's going to ruin everything. You know that look we get from our family members or our spouse when we show up after the crime, if you will? Like, what are you doing here? What do you want? They were so done with me, and I was appalled by their reaction. And so I stayed with my dad at his house for 2 days, and I was crawling out of my skin. Quite literally a bag of nerves. I need a drink. My body doesn't need a drink, but my mind needs a drink. And I got to get out of here. And I couldn't sleep or eat or do anything. And on Monday morning, I snuck out of the house. And I took a car that did not belong to me. And I headed to south part of Brooklyn, to a liquor store. And everything was still closed. It was still dark out. It was maybe 5 a.m, maybe. And I got out of the car. My plan here, I got set up and the ambush showed up. My plan was to get a pint of whiskey to still my nerves, shut this voice down, and get in the car and go back to see my dad and chill out. And when I got out of the car, I'm walking up and down the sidewalk because I couldn't sit in the car behind the wheel. I'm a nervous wreck, and I get out of the car, and I'm pacing up and down the sidewalk. And this is, for me, alcoholism. My body did not need alcohol in it with me. Once I'm physically sober, I don't need to get any more physically sober. You can't. But the mind is another problem. It has its agenda of its own. And when the obsession is so loud and powerful, it begins to boomerang and feel physical. And I literally felt like I was going through withdrawal. I'm sweaty, I'm clammy, I'm anxious, I'm a nervous wreck, my belly's upside down. I need to get a drink. I don't need a drink. But the mind says, yeah, you do. That's why for an alcoholic like me, I make a lot of meetings. I love our sacred fellowship, but meetings alone are not going to treat that. Because I can deal with that hour in rock and roll and drink 50 cups of coffee. Then the meeting ends after an hour and I go back out there and it's got me. I need a new GPS. And having just a little information can be dangerous in the wrong hands. What I was seeking, what I need to seek is transformation. What I need is a new relationship with God or our Creator, as a book talks about. I need to be placed in new soil. If I always do what I always did, I'm always going to get what I always got. How willing was I to be changed? I need to be mindful now that when I go to God, I'm not looking to God and saying, hey, God, here's the plans, here's my to-do list, get to work, but rather to go to God to be changed. In that place of being molded again and again and again. And so I went to the liquor store and I bought a pint of whiskey. I drank it down. And you know what? that anxious feeling, those butterflies in the chest stopped. My clammy hands cooled off. The sweaty forehead cooled down, and I can breathe again. I'm back. I just did 9 weeks of punishment and treatment. Now I'm out, and I'll figure out my life. Except I'm alcoholic. See, a non-alcoholic maybe polish off a pint of whiskey, get in their car, and drive home, and not drink for God knows when. But I'm alcoholic. I'm the guy on page 21. And so I had to go back in the liquor store and get a second pint of whiskey. I wasn't getting out. Like the guy on the bar stool, the woman on the bar stool, I'm not getting out of the liquor. I'm not leaving the liquor store. I had to go in and buy a second pint of whiskey because now the allergies on, the cravings on. I'm stuck in more once again. And I bought the second pint of whiskey and drank it. Now I'm feeling that. So I need to get drunker. I'm not getting out. And by the end of the night, I'm panhandling all over again. I'm blind drunk from what I remember and copping Valium on the street. Right back after 9 weeks, as if I never spent 10 minutes in treatment. It's back again. So the separation from alcohol, I can look at my separation from alcohol. Well, Pete, you've been separated 35 years, as if it's a linear rather than a transformational journey. And keep those 35 years on my show, on my sleeve when I'm in a meeting like I've arrived, where alcoholism is not impressed. It really isn't. Alcohol is not impressed with the length of time of sober or how much information. The only thing alcoholism gets tight about is when God shows up. It starts out, okay, I'm out. And so I went on one of the worst drunks I had up until that point. Got arrested a bunch of times. Looking back on it now, if you get in front of a judge long enough, they're going to put you away. I wasn't a violent guy. I didn't carry guns. I wasn't that guy. But if you get picked up enough, you're going to go away. And, I'll be honest, my dad's money with the lawyers and some of his connections kept me out of prison. I remember counselors telling my dad, you should leave him and just let him go to jail. And my dad was ready to go to war for that. But I landed in my 6th treatment center and I walked out after 36 hours because my reality showed up. And it kind of sounded like this: I'm never getting sober. Who am I kidding? And the realization of I've destroyed my family. My family was suffering from alcoholism and they're not alcoholic. Family afterwards talks about this. We hear it from our family members. If a siren goes off and we're not home, they think it's us, for us. Or if the phone rings late at night, you don't want to pick up the phone because this is the phone call. It's the dead phone call. They died. And my family was walking on eggshells. And I realized the damage I'd done to them, the bad relationships I got myself in, the harm I brought to other people, the shame, the embarrassment, all of it. And I figured I'm better off just dying. And I tried to do that in some Fleabag motel in Staten Island, New York. And God kept interrupting my death. How dark it is before the dawn. And then I got homeless. And I don't know how to do homeless at the time. I'm petrified. I'm not the fighter guy. And I weigh, at that time, I'm weighing in at 130 pounds. I'm 205 now, and my friend Chris out there has me doing CrossFit, so maybe my weight will be a little bit better in a few months if I don't collapse and die first. But I weighed 130 pounds. I'm about 205 right now, 200, thereabouts. I'm urinating blood and I'm running around with hepatitis C, so I'm weak and feeble. And I can't be on the street to defend myself. So I take up residency in the back of an abandoned building hallway. And that's where I lived for way too long. And then June 23rd showed up and my life changed. See, I can't hear my illness all the time making its way down the block. If I'm spiritually fit, as it gets close, I can hear it. I can't see God coming down the block and about to revamp my life until it's happening. And sometimes I question it until it's done and I land. I say, okay, see what happened. And back then, I had no idea that God was going to interrupt my life with the way and the power that he was about to. Because on June 23rd, 1988, it didn't feel very godly. It didn't look godly. It didn't sound godly. I didn't smell or look godly. But I got to a place where desperation finally screamed louder than the ego, and the ego gets crushed. And it can happen in sobriety. The ego gets crushed for a moment. And when that gets crushed, even for a moment, there's a vacuum and God's light can shine in. It seems to be over and over and over again. Thomas Merton talks at length about this, that in our most vulnerable, when we're most weak, when it seems to be most dark, is where we find God's strength and God's light. If I'm not leaning on me, I will be guided. If I'm leaning on me, it means I don't need God. I got it means I don't need God. And at that point, there was no strength in me, nothing. And I got up off the floor and I was going out on the street to try to panhandle some money because I need whiskey. I after my fifth treatment center, I wasn't with the dry goods anymore. It was whiskey and pills. And I collapsed on the floor. And I remember I couldn't stop weeping. It was almost as if my life was passing before my eyes. And to give you a visual, it wasn't that dramatic, but that was the feeling. And I thought about what happened to me. How did I get here? I'm a bum. And I can remember thinking, it's the first time in my life I don't want to die. I can remember thinking even like if I get a drink in me, which I desperately need right now, I'm going to die. And if I don't get a drink in me, I'm going to die. What am I supposed to do? I really know what it is to be without power in that moment and in panic, real panic. And so the very same God who I despised for so long and mocked people who followed God, especially men, I thought men were weak and cowardly for following God. That very same God I beg for mercy. That very same God I still seek mercy from. In fact, in my little opinion here, my point of view, and I think the thing, we have traditions and we have all the things that keep AA together, but I think what the umbrella over all of Alcoholics Anonymous that keeps us walking in the same direction is God's mercy. Because if we break apart, where are we going to go? I think it's God's mercy that says, I forgive them, bring them together. Forgive them and bring them together. They're doing it again. They're going to go to the alcoholics. They're trying to ruin AA. Mercy, bring them together. We always have people in AA who want to change AA and revamp it. And God says, mercy, I'll keep you together. And God's mercy has me on this. We know about his love. We know about his power. But I need to take a look at his mercy. And so my dad found me on the street that particular day. Later in the day, tore up from the floor up. And off I went to my seventh treatment center. And same place in Amityville. And then they sent me out to Minnesota. And I wound up doing another year treatment and sober living and all of that, halfway, three-quarter house. But something changed. When the ego gets crushed for that brief moment, when desperation screams louder than the ego, we're listening different. I started looking back on it now, and what the steps do is bring that about and make it real fertile and enhances it. I start to listen what I didn't know with the soul and see from the soul and speak from that place, because what God does is close the ears to the mind. That's what he does. And I desperately wanted more than ever what you guys had to offer. And I found it out in Minnesota at a meeting called the Three Legacies. A lot of meetings, but Three Legacies meeting in particular. And a year later, I was brought home and I found a sponsor. And not a sponsor in name only. I had very, very rigid, structured bulldogs. I mean, that's the best way to put it. Who held my feet to the fire more times than I cared to. about what I was doing and the steps and all of that, and call times and meeting times. And they disciplined me to this life, and I've been disciplined to this life. And I can't fathom life not being that way, because in that discipline, there's a lot of freedom. In that narrow road, there's a tremendous amount of room. And so off I went and began a journey in Alcoholics Anonymous, a journey in the book. And God has opened up me enough to be listened to many people outside of AA, many in AA, many spiritual books. And that family that was ripped apart by alcoholism has been brought back together. I had to bury my dad the end of July. It was one of the most painful thing I went through in sobriety. I've been divorced. I've been, have buried a lot of people, but this one was a Mike Tyson punch to my jaw. It had me on my back. But God and AA, get you up off the mat and chopping wood and carrying water and back in the game. And that feeling sorrow and sad for a loss of a loved one is perfectly okay to do. And so I go through that. And, currently my wife and I, we're right in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's interesting how I met my wife. I went to Bellingham, Washington to do a talk in the spirit of service and came home with the wife. AA is just a great place to be. But we're both in the middle of AA, and we're surrounded by some really neat people. Our whole life belongs to God and AA, and we're involved with our church. And a lot of the folks I listen to, I have a handful of favorites that I listen to in AA. A lot of them have passed on. Just they speak to my heart. And a lot of the stuff I read and listen to is what I'll call non-conference approved literature and speakers. They're coming from a religious or spiritual thing, and they just feed my soul. When I put the AAs together and the spiritual religious stuff together, it makes perfect sense to me. It makes perfect sense to my soul. In AA, when we kind of, someone says something, we give that AA, that nod we do, that's not a conclusion of the mind. I have found that. That's the soul. It's almost a visceral reaction. That's the soul acknowledging what it always knew. That's why when someone says that, we kind of, yes, I know, I get it, I identify, I can feel that. And all the words just convey that to us. So I have a prayer life. I have an altar right here, what I call an altar. I have a prayer life, a life of meditation, and a great sponsor, a great little home group. And I'll just close with this and get out of your way. It came to me in meditation one time that the only thing God wants from me is my soul. And I give him my soul and he gives me my life. And I give him my life and he gives me purpose. And I've given him my sinfulness and he's given me forgiveness. I've given him my drunkenness and he's given me sobriety. And I give him my sobriety. And over and over again, he gives me the sacred rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and the men and women in it. And for this, I'm forever grateful and way overpaid. So I chop wood and carry water. And every time I walk into a meeting and say, my name is Peter, I'm an alcoholic, you always say hi back. I never had it so good. Anyway, that's all I got, guys. Thanks for listening. Peace.